Good evening, 23rd December, Wednesday, 2020. Happy Yule, which happened 2 days ago, by the way, the solstice. And this is a gift to you. It's a reading it's a short story written by my favorite all-time author. His name is Harlan Ellison. And the story that I'm about to read is, to me, the most personally significant story he ever wrote. It's called The Cheese Stands Alone. Court lay with his eyes closed, feigning sleep, for exactly 1 hour after she had begun to snore. Every few minutes, he would permit his eyes to open to slits, marking the passage of time on the luminous dial of his watch there on the nightstand. At 5 a.m. precisely, he slipped out of the Olympic pool-sized motel bed, swept up his clothes from the tangled pile on the floor, and dressed quickly in the bathroom. He did not turn on the light. Because he could not remember her name, he did not leave a note. Because he did not wish to demean her, he did not leave a 20 on the nightstand. Because he could not get away fast enough, he pushed the car out of the parking slot in front of the room and let it gather momentum down through the open lot until it bumped out onto the street. Through the open window, he turned the wheel, caught the door before the car began rolling backward, slid inside, and only then started the engine. Route 1 between Big Sur and Monterey was empty. The fog was up. Somewhere to his left, below the cliffs, the Pacific murmured threats like an ancient adversary. The fog billowed across the highway, conjuring ectoplasmic shapes in the foreshortened beams of his headlights. Moisture hung from the great, thick trees like silver memories of time before the coming of man. The twisting coast road climbed through terrain that reminded him of Brazilian rainforest, mist-drenched and chill, impenetrable and aggressively ominous. Court drove faster, daring disaster to catch up with him. There had to be more than the threat of the forest. As there had to be more in his life than endodontics and income properties and guilt-laden late-night frottage with slow-eyed dental assistants. More than pewter frames holding diplomas from prestigious universities. More than a wife from a socially prominent family and 2.6 children who might fit a soap manufacturer's perfect advertising vision of all American youth. More than getting up each morning to a world that held no surprises. There had to be disaster somewhere, in the forest, in the fog, in the night, but not on Route 1 at 5:30, not for him, not right now. By 6:30, he reached Monterey and realized he had not eaten since noon of the previous day when he had finished the root canal therapy on Mrs. Udall, had racked the drill, had taken off his smock and donned his jacket, and walked out of the office without a word to Jan or Alicia, had driven out of the underground garage and started up the coast, fleeing without a thought to destination. There had been no time for dinner when he picked up the cocktail waitress, and no late-night pizza parlor open for a snack before she fell asleep. Acid had begun to burn a hole in his stomach lining from too much coffee and too little peace of mind. He drove into the tourist center of Monterey and had no trouble finding a long stretch of open parking spaces. There was no movement along the shop-fronted sidewalks. The sun seemed determined never to come up. The fog was heavy and wet. Streaming quicksand flowed around him. For a moment, the windows of a shop jammed with driftwood base lamps destined for Iowa basement rec rooms solidified in the eye of the swirling fog. Then they were gone. But in that moment, he saw his face in the glass. This night might stretch through the day. He walked carefully through the streets, looking for an early morning dinette where he might have a Belgian waffle with frozen strawberries slathered in sugary syrup, an egg sunny side up, something sunny side up in this unending darkness. Nothing was open. He thought about that. Didn't anybody go to work early in Monterey? Were there no services girding themselves for the locust descent of teenagers with rucksacks, corpulent business machine salesmen in crimson Budweiser caps, and Semitic widows with blue hair? Had there been an eclipse? Was this the shy, pocked, turned-away face of the moon? Where the hell was daylight? Fog blew past him, parted in streamers for an instant. Down a side street, he saw a light, yellow faded as parchment, wan and timorous, but a light. He turned down the side street and searched through the quicksilver for the source. It seemed to have vanished. Past closed bakeries and jewelry shops and scuba gear emporia, a wraith in the fog, he realized he moved through not only the empty town and through the swaddling fog, but through a condition of fear. Notobiosis, an environmental condition in which germ-free animals have been inoculated with strains of known microorganisms. Fear. The light swam up through the silent, silvered shadow sea, and he was right in front of it. Had he moved to it? Had it moved to him? It was a bookstore, without a sign, and within, many men and women browsing. He stood in the darkness, untouched by the sallow light from the nameless bookshop, staring at the nexus. For such a small shop, so early in the morning, it was thronged. Men and women stood almost elbow to elbow, each absorbed in the book close at hand. Notobiosis. Court felt the fear sliding through his veins and arteries like poison. They were not turning the pages. Had they not moved their bodies, a scratching at the lip, the blinking of eyes, random shifting of feet, a slouch, a straightening of back, a glance around, he would have thought them mannequins. A strange but interesting tableau to induce passers-by to come in and also browse. They were alive, but they did not turn the pages of the books that absorbed them. Nor did they return a book to the shelf and take another. Each man, each woman, held fascinated by words where the books had been opened. He turned to walk away as quickly as he could. The car. Get on the road. There had to be a truck stop, a diner, a greasy spoon, fast food, anything. I've been here before, and this isn't Monterey. The tapping on the window stopped him. He turned back. The desperate expression on the tortoise-like face of the tiny old woman stiffened his back. He found his right hand lifting, as if to put itself between him and the sight of her. He shook his head no, definitely not, but he had no idea what he was rejecting. She made staying motions with her wrinkled little hands and mouthed words through the glass of the shop window. She spoke very precisely, and the words were these: "I have it here for you." Then she motioned him to come around to the door, to enter, to step inside. "I have it here for you." The luminous dial of his watch said 7 o'clock. It was still night. Fog continued to pour down from the Monterey Peninsula's forest. Court tried to walk away. San Francisco was up the line. The sun had to be blazing over Russian Hill, Candlestick Park, and Coit Tower. The world still held surprises. "You're loose now. You've broken the cycle," he heard his future whisper. "Don't respond. Go to the sun." He saw his hand reach for the doorknob. He entered the bookshop. They all looked up for a moment, registered nothing. The door closed behind him. They dropped their gazes to the pages. Now he was inside among them. "I'm certain I have it in hardcover, a very clean copy," the little old turtle woman said. Her smile was toothless. How could there be fog in here? "I'm just browsing," Court said. "Yes, of course," she said. "Everyone is just browsing." She laid her hand on his arm and he shuddered. "Just till a restaurant opens." "Yes, of course." He was having trouble breathing. The heartburn. Does it always stay dark so late into the morning here? "Unseasonal," she said. "Look around. I have it here for you. Exactly." He looked around. "I'm not looking for anything special." She walked with him, her hand on his arm. Neither were they. She nodded at the crowd of men and women. "But they found answers here. I have a very fine stock." No pages were turned. He looked over the shoulder of a middle-aged woman staring intently at a book with steel engravings on both open pages. The turtle said, "Her curiosity was aroused by the question, how was the first vampire created? Fascinating concept, isn't it? If vampires can only be created by a normal human being receiving the bite of a vampire, then how was the first one created? She's found the answer here in my wonderful stock." Court stared at the book. One of the steel engravings was of Noah's Ark. But wouldn't that mean there had to be two on board? The turtle drew him down the line of stacks. He paused behind a young man in a very tight t-shirt. He looked as if he'd been working out. His head was bent so close to the open book in his hands that his straight blonde hair fell over his eyes. "For years he has felt sympathetic pains with an unknown person," the turtle confided. "He would sense danger, elation, lust, despair, none of his own making, and none having to do with anything with his circumstance at the moment. Finally, he began to realize he was linked with another, like the Corsican brothers. But his parents assured him he was an only child, there was no twin. He found the answer in this volume." She made shooing motions with her blue-veined hands. Court peered around the young man's head and hair. It was a book on African history. There were tears on the young man's eyes. There was a spot of moisture on the verso. Court looked away quickly. He didn't want to intrude. Next in line was a very tall, ascetic-looking man, carefully holding a folio of pages that had obviously been written with a quill. By the flourishes and swirls of the writing, Court knew the book had to be quite old and likely very valuable. The tortoise woman leaned in close, her head barely reaching Court's chest, and she said, "16th century, first Shakespeare folio. This gentleman wandered through most of his adult life and decades of academic pursuits, tormented by the question of who actually wrote the Book of Sir Thomas More, the Bard, or his rival Anthony Munday. There lies his answer before his eyes. I have such superior stock. Why don't any of these people turn the page? Why bother? They've found the answer they sought. And there's nothing more they want to know? Apparently not. Interesting, isn't it?" Court found it more chilling than interesting. Then the chill fastened itself permanently to his heart, like a limpet, with the unasked question, how long have these browsers been here like this? Here's a woman who always wanted to know if pure evil exists anywhere on the face of the earth. The woman wore a mantilla over her shoulders, and she stared mesmerized at a book on natural history. This man hungered for a complete list of the contents of the great library of Alexandria, the subject matter contained on those 500,000 handwritten papyrus scrolls at the final moment before the library was torched in the 5th century. The man was gray and wizened, and his face had been incised with an expression of ancient weariness that reminded Court of Stonehenge. He pored over 2 pages set so closely with infinitesimal typefaces that Court could not make out a single word in the fly specks. "A woman who lost her memory," said the turtle, indicating with a nod of her tortoise head a beautiful creature festooned with silk scarves of a dozen different colors. "Woke up in a white slave brothel in Marrakech, ran for her life, and has spent years wandering around trying to discover who she was." She laughed a low, warm laugh. "She found out here. The whole story's right there in that book." Court turned to her, firmly removing her withered claw from his arm. "And you have it here for me, don't you?" "Yes, I have it here, in my fine stock." "What precisely do you have that I want, here, in your fine stock?" He didn't even need her to speak. He knew exactly what she would say. She would say, "Why, I have the answers you seek." And then he would saunter around the bookshop, feeling superior to these poor devils who'd been standing here God only knew how long, and finally he'd turn to her and smile and say, "I don't even know the questions." And they would both smile at that one, he like an idiot because it was the most banal of cliches, she because she'd known he would say something dithering like that, and he would refrain from apologizing for the passing stupidity, and then he would ask her the question, and she would point out a shelf and say, "The book you want is right here," and then she'd suggest he try pages such and such for exactly what he wanted to know, that which had driven him up the coast. And if, 10,000 years later, the karmic essence of all that's left of Suleiman the Magnificent, blessed be his name, Suleiman of the potent seal, sultan and master of all the jinn, of each and every class, of genie, ghoul, ifrit, selah, div, and iblis, if that transubstantiated essence comes round again, like Halley's Comet comes round again, that transmogrified spirit circling back on its limitless Hygeia through crimson eternity, if it comes round again, it would find him, Court, Dr. Alexander Court, DDS, a dental corporation, still standing here elbow to elbow with the other browsers, coelacanths, outlined to shale, mastodons flash frozen in ice, wasps embedded in amber, nodobiosis forever. "Why do I have the feeling all this isn't random?" Court said to the old turtle woman. He began edging toward the door behind him. "Why do I have the feeling all of this has been here, waiting for me, just the way it was waiting for all the rest of these poor fucking losers? Why do I get the smell of rotting gardenias off you, old lady?" He was almost at the door. She stood in a cleared space at the center of the bookshop, staring at me. "You're no different, Dr. Court. You need the answers, the same as the rest. Maybe a little love potion, a power stone, immortality, all that good jive. I've seen places like this on television shows. But I don't bite, old lady. I have no need you can fill." And his hand was on the doorknob, and he was turning it, and he yanked, and the door opened to the ominous fog, and the unending night, and the waiting forest, and the old lady said, "Wouldn't you like to know when you'll have the best moment of your entire life?" And he closed the door and stood with his back against it. His smile was unhealthy. "Well, you got me," he whispered. "When you'll be happiest," she said, softly, barely moving her thin lips. when you'll be strongest, most satisfied, at the peak of your form, most in control, bravest, best looking, most highly regarded by the rest of the world, and your top moment, your biggest surge, your most golden achievement, that which forms the pattern for the rest of your life, the instant than which you will have no finer if you live to be 1,000. Here in my fine stock, I have a tome that will tell you the day, hour, minute, second of your noblest future. Just ask, and it's yours. I have it here for you. And what does it cost me? She opened her wet mouth and smiled. Her wrinkled little hands fell open palms up in the air before her. Why, nothing, she said. Like these others, you're just browsing, aren't you? The limpet chill that ossified his spine told him there were worse things than deals with the devil, just browsing as an example. Well, she asked, waiting. He thought about it, wetting his lips, suddenly gone dry now that the decisive moment was at hand. What if it comes only a few years from now? What if I've only got a little while to achieve whatever it is I always wanted to achieve? How do I live with the rest of my life after that, knowing I'll never be any better, any happier, any richer, or more secure, knowing I'll never top what I did in that moment? What'll the rest of my life be worth? The tiny turtle woman shouldered aside two browsers who moved sluggishly apart as if turning in their sleep, and drew a short, squat book from a shelf at the waist level. Court blinked quickly. No, she hadn't drawn it out of the stacks. It had slid forward and jumped into her hand. It looked like an old, big little book. She turned back and offered it to him. Just browsing, she said, moistly. He reached for it and stopped, curling his fingers back. She arched her finely penciled eyebrows and gave him a bemused, quizzical look. You're awfully anxious to get me to read that book, he said. We're here to serve the public, she said amiably. I have a question to ask you. No, 2 questions. There are 2 questions I want you to answer. Then I'll consider browsing through your fine stock. If I can't give you the answer, which is, after all, our business here, then I'm sure something in my fine stock has the proper response. But take this book that you need, just hold it, and I'll answer your question. Questions? 2 questions? Very important, I'm sure. She held out the squat little book. Court looked at it. It was a big little book, the kind he had had when he was a child, with pages of drawings alternating with pages of type, featuring comic strip heroes like Red Ryder or The Shadow or Skippy. Within reach, the answer to the question everyone wanted to ask, what will be the best moment of my life? He didn't touch it. I'll ask, you'll answer, then you got me, then I'll do some browsing. She shrugged as if to say, as you choose. He thought, as you choose, so shall you reap. He said, what's the name of this bookshop? Her face twitched. Court had the sudden rush of memory from childhood when he'd first read the story of Rumpelstiltskin. The turtle woman's face grew mean. It doesn't have a name, it just is. How do we find you in the yellow pages? Court said, taunting her. It was obvious he was suddenly in a position of power, even though he had no idea from what source that power flowed. No name at all. We don't need a name. We have a very select clientele. It's never had a name. We don't need any names. Her voice, which had been Turtle smooth and soft and chocolate had become rusted metal, scraping rusted metal. No names. I don't gotta tell you no names. I don't gotta show you no stinking badges. She paused to let the bile recede, and in the eye of the silent court asked his second question. What's in this for you? What's your fix? Where's the bottom line profit in your P&L? What do you get out of this, frighty old lady? Her mouth went tight. Her blazing eyes seemed both ancient and silvery with youthful ferocity. Clotho, she said. Clotho, Rare Books. He didn't recognize the name, but from the way she said it, he knew he had pried an important secret from her. Had done it, apparently, because he was the first to have asked. Had done it as anyone might have done it, had they thought of it. And having asked, and having been answered, he knew he was safe from her. So tell me, Miss Clotho, or Ms. Clotho, or Mrs., or whatever you happen to be, tell me, what do you get out of this? What coin of the realm do you get paid? You work this weird shop, you trap all these fools in here, and I'll bet when I walk out of here, poof, it all vanishes, goes back to Never Never Land. So what kind of home life do you have? Do you eat 3 squares a day? Do you have to change your Tampax when you get your period? Do you even get the menses? Or has menopause already passed you by? Immortal maybe? Tell me, weird little turtle lady, if you live forever, do you get change of life? Do you still want to get laid? Did you ever get laid? How's your caca, firm or hard? Do weirdy old fantastic ladies who vanish with their bookstores have to take a shit? Or maybe not, huh? She screamed at him, "You can't talk like that to me. Do you know who I am?" He screamed right back at her, "Fuck no. I don't know who the hell you are, and what's more to the point, I don't give a righteous damn who you are." The zombie readers were now looking up. They seemed distressed, as if a long-held trance was being broken. They blinked furiously, moved aimlessly. They resembled groundhogs coming out to check their shadows. Clotho snarled at him. "Stop yelling! You're making my customers nervous." "You mean I'm waking them up? Come on, everybody, rise and shine. Swing on down. How you fixed, destiny-wise?" "Shut up!" "Yeah, maybe I will, and maybe I won't, old turtle. Maybe you answer my question, what you were doing waiting here for me specifically, and maybe I let these goofballs go back to their browsing." She leaned in as close as she could to him without touching him, and she hissed like a snake. Then she said tightly, "You, what makes you think it was you we wait for? We wait for everyone. This was your turn. They all get a turn. You'll all get your turn in the browsing shop." "What's this we business? Are you feeling imperial?" "We, my sisters and I." "Ah, there's more than one of you, is there? A chain bookstore. Very cute. But then I suppose you have branches these days. What with the competition from B. Dalton, and Crows, and Walden Books." She clenched her teeth, and for the first time, Court could see that the little turtle actually had teeth inside those straight, thin lips. "Take this book or get out of my shop," she said in a deadly whisper. He took the big little book from her quivering hands. "I've never dealt with anyone as vile, as rude," she snarled. "Customer is always right, sweetie," he said, and he opened the book to precisely the right page, where he read his finest moment, the knowledge that would make the remainder of his life an afterthought, and also ran, marking time, a steady ride on the downhill side. When would it come? A year hence? 2 years? 5, 10, 25, 50? Or at the blessed final moment of his life, having climbed all the way to the end? He read. that his finest moment had come when he was 10 years old, when during a sandlot baseball game, a pickup game in which you got to bat only if you put someone out, the best hitter in the neighborhood hit a shattering line drive to deepest center field, where he was always forced to play because he was no good at baseball, and he ran back and back and back up his bare hand, and miraculously, as he, little Alex Court, leaped as high as he could, miraculously, the pain of the frazzled hardball as it hit his hand and stayed there was sweeter than anything he had ever felt before or would feel again. The moment replayed in the words on the page of that terrible book. Slowly, slowly, he sank to earth, his feet touching and his eyes going to his hand, and there in the red, anguished palm of his hand, without a trapper's mitt, he held the hardest, surest home run line drive ever hit by anyone. He was the killer, the master of the world, the tallest thing on the face of the earth, big and bold and golden, adept beyond any telling, miraculous, a miracle, a walking miracle. It was the best moment of his life. At the age of 10. Nothing else he would do in his life, nothing he had done between the age of 10 and 35 as he read the big little book, nothing he would do till he died at whatever number of years remained for him. Nothing would match that moment. He looked up slowly. He was having trouble seeing. He was crying. Clotho was smiling at him nastily. "You're lucky it wasn't one of my sisters. They react much worse to being screwed with." She started to turn away from him. The sound of his slamming the big little book closed onto the counter of the showcase stopped her. He turned without saying a word and started for the door. Behind him, he heard her hurrying after him. "Where do you think you're going?" "Back to the real world." He had trouble speaking. The tears were making him sob, and his words came raggedly. "You've got to stay. Everyone stays." "Not me, sweetie. The cheese stands alone." "It's all futile. You'll never know grandeur again. It's all dross, waste, emptiness. There's nothing as good if you live to be 1,000. He opened the door. The fog was out there, and the night, and the final forest. He stopped, looked down at her. "Maybe if I'm lucky, I won't live to be 1,000. Then he stepped through the door of Clotho, Rare Books, and closed it tightly behind him. She watched through the window as he began to walk off into the fog. He stopped and leaned in to speak as close to the glass as he could. She strained her weird little turtle face forward and heard him say, "What's left may be only the tag end of a shitty life, but it's my shitty life. And it's the only game in town, sweetie. The cheese stands alone." Then he walked off into the fog, crying, but trying to whistle. Happy Yule.